good. I think we're good. So last time we learned how to factor using the greatest common factor, and we're going to elaborate on that a little bit by doing what is called factoring by grouping.
Group like terms? Is that what it is?
It's like that, except we're not going to group like terms together because this particular problem that I gave you, 4x cubed plus 14x squared plus 6x plus 21, doesn't have any like terms. All it's got is unlike terms. But factoring by grouping works like this. When I say grouping, I mean group the first two things together. So these two we're going to group together. And group the last two things together. So I'm going to take those first two things that I grouped together, 4x cubed plus 14x squared, and I am going to factor just those two terms only. So when you look at those two terms, what is the greatest common factor? Now, it's been a couple of days since we've done this, so let me refresh your memory. First, you do the greatest common factor of 4 and 14. 4 and 14, what's the greatest common factor? It's not 4, because 14 can't divide by 4 evenly. Neither one of them can divide by 8 evenly. 1 and 2 both work. They can both divide by 1 and 2, but 2 is the biggest. So 2. No, you had it right. Stop guessing. You nailed it. So 2 is the biggest number that both 4 and 14 can divide by. Okay? Next, we move on to our variables, x cubed and x squared. What's the greatest common factor of x cubed and x squared? X squared. Yeah. Uno momento. Okay. So after I factor out the greatest common factor of 2x squared, let's go back to what we learned how to do with the GCF last time. What's left in my parentheses after I pull out the greatest common factor? Oh, you're multiplying. We divide. What's 4x cubed divided by 2x squared? Yep, 2x. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X cubed divided by x squared is x. Then we'll do the same thing with the 14. What's 14x squared divided by my greatest common factor? Yep, just 7 because the x's cancel. Plus sign in the middle. So we're going to stop with that one right there, and we're going to go over to our second set that we grouped together, which was the 6x plus 21. 6x plus 21, what's the greatest common factor? 3? 3 is correct. And let's see what will be in those parentheses. So we'll take the 6x and divide by 3. That gives us 2x, good. And then we'll do the second term, which was 21. 21 divided by 3 is 7, plus sign in the middle. They're the same. I'm going to put these back together into one problem, one expression. There's the first one. Here's the second one. Plus sign in between them. And what Shelby has noticed very astutely is that the two sets of parentheses are exactly the same. When that happens, that tells you I have done it correctly so far. My answer to this problem is going to be 2 sets of parentheses. The first set of parentheses is going to be the thing that they have in common. The second set of parentheses is going to be the stuff that's left over outside the parentheses. 2x squared plus 3. That is my second set. And that's the answer. Those 2 sets of parentheses. So we're taking our greatest common factor idea that we learned last week, and we're applying it to a new set of problems. Okay. This time, our problems have 4 terms, and we're factoring them by grouping.
What do you want an odd number?
You can't factor by, you can factor by grouping, but it takes an extra step. We will not be doing that for some time. So the first thing that we would do in these problems is we would see if all 4 of these have a greatest common factor. Now, in this case, they don't. All 4 of them do not have a greatest common factor, but we would still check first. Yep, now we're going to group them up. So these 2 are going to be in a group together over here. And these 2 are going to be in a group over here. So now let's look at the left side first. 6x cubed minus 3x squared. What is the greatest common factor? 3 is correct. What else? 3x squared. Very good. Thank you, Brock. To find what would be left in parentheses, we take our original 2 pieces and divide them by the greatest common factor. So 6x cubed divided by 3x squared gives me 2x. Good. And then 3x squared divided by 3x squared gives me 1. There was a minus sign in between them, so a minus sign in between. Now we'll look at our second group, 4x minus 2. The greatest common factor of 4x minus 2 is 2. To figure out what's left in the parentheses, we take each of the original terms and divide by the greatest common factor. 4x divided by 2 is 2x. And 2 divided by 2 is with a minus sign in between. It is at this point that we could look and see, have we done it correctly so far? I think we have. Why do I think we've done it correctly so far? Because the parentheses are exactly the same. So my answer to this problem is going to be 2 sets of parentheses. The first set of parentheses is going to be the thing they have in common, 2x minus 1. Right. 3x squared plus 2 is what's left over. That's the other set of parentheses, 3x plus 2. And that's the answer. And that's the way, I like it. As Gandhi once said. They couldn't bring him down. Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi?
Who? He doesn't know who Gandhi is.
She's
This is
being
why I was scared to ask.
she's being silly.
You didn't learn this in 6th grade?
Don't make me show you the 3-hour epic film Gandhi.
I just watched the presentation.
He was an Indian who defined the nature of peaceful protest.
But he said defied. I was like,
Peaceful protest.
yeah, you started right.
Gandhi invented the Molotov cocktail. One of the ways that he did his peaceful protest, maybe the way that he's most famous for outside of India, is for going on a hunger strike where he did not eat for a very long time. I don't remember how long, in protest of war and genocide. I think they call it fasting sometimes. If you're doing it in protest, I think it's called a hunger strike.
Like, well, if you do it, since he was doing it, like, his religion, when it comes to religion, when you're starving yourself, they call it fasting to focus your mind on whoever, you know, worshiping.
It's very disappointing, Brock.
No, I know he's.
Brock says the difference between them depends on how fast you do it.
That's not funny.
That's Brock. It's like
But he was.
it's like having Ellie in the Zoom chat. Okay.
He's focusing his mind on the protest, not protesting, but doing.
Well, there weren't any 7-Elevens for him to loot back then, so his options were limited if he wanted to protest. So this is one in which we do have two like terms we could combine. We have a minus 9x and a plus 16x. We could combine those. But if we combined them, what would our next step be? We just have like 3 terms without a common factor. So I think it might be wiser for us to try to factor by grouping first. So let's group these two together. What's the greatest common factor of 12x squared and 9x? One's a common factor, but it's not the greatest common factor.
No, it's not 2.
It's 3. 3 is the largest number. 12 and 9 can both be divided by. And what about x squared and x? Just x. Let's figure out what would be left inside the parentheses. We take the first term, 12x squared, and divide by the greatest common factor, which gives us, good. Then we take the second term, 9x, and divide it by the greatest common factor. That gives us 3 with a minus sign in between. Now, hopefully, when we do this next set, we also end up with 4x minus 3 in the parentheses. Let's see. 16x and 12. What is the greatest common factor? 16 can't be divided by 3.
4.
Very good. 4. 4x or just 4? Just 4 because the 12 doesn't have an x. So let's take each term and divide by our greatest common factor. 16x divided by 4 gives us 4x. And then 12 divided by 4 gives us, with a minus sign in between, Lord have mercy, look at that. They're the same. Hallelujah. That means we've done it correctly. Mostly thanks to me, but I guess you guys were in the room. So our answer is 2 set of parentheses. 1 set of parentheses is the thing they have in parentheses, 4x minus 3. And the other set of parentheses is the 3x plus 4. The order doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which set of parentheses comes first. Oh, are you looking at my picture in the Zoom chat?
That one's ugly.
Oh.
No, this is picture.
You're so rude to me. That's a picture of my daughter, you monster.
Oh, so she must have gotten it from there.
Wow.
Wow.
That's mean.
You just an innocent child.
You know what?
Nothing to you, and you decide to be mean.
You're not invited to the hacky sack circle.
Ooh.
No, joining.
I'm better off by myself anyways.
No, nobody cares at all that she calls me ugly. As soon as she calls somebody else ugly, you're like, too far.
Called Audrey ugly.
With Mr. Taylor, we understand because that boy needs help.
She called
Y'all
Audrey.
don't know that I'm joking.
Audrey's a different story.
Y'all don't know that I'm joking.
Do not joke about calling Audrey ugly.
They knew you were joking about me because clearly.
We did it like for 2
Oh yeah, we were definitely.
I'm sorry you got offended.
Snowflake.
Moving on. This factoring by grouping problem is a little bit different because there is a minus sign in between the two groups instead of a plus sign, which is going to change things for us a little bit. But let's go ahead and proceed as normal at first. So our first group will be x cubed minus 2x squared. The greatest common factor there is
Square.
x squared. What will be left inside? Yes, Brock. You have a question. Oh. Close. Let's go ahead and write it out. X cubed divided by our greatest common factor is x. 2x squared divided by our greatest common factor is 2 with a minus sign in between.
Is the 3x negative?
Yes. Because that's the same thing as plus negative 3x plus x. The greatest common factor is 3. Don't write this down, just watch what happens when I use 3. So I put 3 in here, and then I would divide. Negative 3x divided by 3 is negative x, and then 6 divided by 3 is 2. And you will notice that I end up with x minus 2 in the first set of parentheses, and negative x plus 2 in the second set of parentheses, which are the same except the signs are switched. The first set of parentheses has a positive x and a negative 2. The second set of parentheses is the opposite. The reason why this doesn't work out perfectly for us, like the last ones have, is because if you have a group that starts with a negative, like this one does, the first number is negative, the number is 3, but you need to also factor out the negative. That's only if it starts with a negative, factor out the negative. So instead of 3, we're going to factor out negative 3 as the greatest common factor. So negative 3x divided by our greatest common factor of negative 3 just gives us x. And 6 divided by our greatest common factor of negative 3 gives us negative 2. And now the two sets of parentheses are the same. If it starts with a negative, you need to factor out the negative. Now, obviously, if it just has a minus sign in it, that's no big deal. We've been doing those for a while. It's only if the group starts with a negative that you need to factor out the negative. So our first set was x squared times x minus 2. And our second set was negative 3 times x minus 2. Part of the answer is the set of parentheses they have in common. And the other part of the answer is what's outside. So x minus 2 is one set of parentheses, and x squared minus 3 is the other set. Now, I want to show you one more. Last problem. And then we're all going to take 1 minute to throw garbage, pencils, staplers, anything heavy you can find at Shelby. Okay. So this one, when I group them, we're not going to finish this problem because we're not going to be able to finish this problem. You'll see why in a second. I'm going to run through this real quick. Okay, so for the first group, the greatest common factor is 3x squared, which would leave me in parentheses with 3x minus 1. Okay. The other group, negative 7x plus 15, 7 and 15 are an unfortunate set of numbers, mostly because 7 is prime. That means 7 can only be divided by 7 and 1. 15 can't be divided by 7. It can only be divided by 1. So that means my greatest common factor here is negative 1. And if I divide both of those terms by negative 1, I get positive 7x and minus 15. And you will notice that we have a problem. The parentheses are not the same. That means this particular polynomial that we started with up here can't be factored. And when it can't be factored, we call it prime. It's a prime polynomial, which means it cannot be factored. And this is what those look like. You'll factor them. You'll do everything exactly perfect the way you're supposed to, but your two parentheses will not be the same. That's what tells you that it's prime. So you got to be real careful when you work it down and your parentheses don't look the same. There are two possibilities. Possibility number one, it's a prime polynomial. Possibility number two, you messed up. So you got to go back and double check when they're prime and be like, okay, am I sure I did this perfectly and it's prime? Or are the parentheses different because I made a little boo-boo, as we say in La Clase de Matemáticas? ¿Preguntas, niños? Qué bueno.